evening, whichever it happens to be in your neck of the woods while you're watching our program today. I am Diana Catherine Plopa. I am there we go, new technology, I'm still learning it. I'm Diana Catherine Plopa from Pages Promotions, and this is Indie Reads TV. Today in the studio, we have as our guest Wendy Sura Thomson. She is a local indie author. She has two books that we're going to be talking about today, Summon the Tiger and The Third Order, and we're going to talk a little bit about her writing career and history in writing and how she got there. So, welcome, Wendy.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me.
So first, to start out with, tell us a little bit about your writing background. How did you get into writing? How old were you when you started this crazy journey? And how did it lead you up into writing your first book, which is Summon the Tiger?
Well, I was not much of a writer, but I was an avid reader for all through my childhood. I had a penchant for numbers, and I was quiet. I mean, I worked in the library. I was around books all the time. But I got on this freighter, and I got down to Florida, and I met a guy named Sloan Wilson, and he called a guy in New York and told the guy in New York, I think she can write. It's like knocked me over with a feather. It was crazy. I have written, it's not been hard for me to write, and I've had to write all through my career. It wasn't expressive creative writing. It was procedures and principles and PowerPoint presentations and persuasive writing.
So more business writing than creative writing.
It was business writing. And then I retired in 2010, and for several years I stayed in the numbers financial arena, and I wanted a change. And I thought that maybe I would go be a substitute teacher because there were signs all over. And I have two sons, and my younger son was aghast at my proposal.
Aghast? He didn't support your teaching endeavors?
He said, you will hate it. We were terrible. I'm so embarrassed the way we taught. We treated substitute teachers. No, don't do that. And I said, well, brilliant child of mine, what should I do? He said, why don't you write a book? I said, you got to be kidding. He said, no, write a book about your life and your life lessons. And so I thought, well, you're on. Now, before that, I had started a couple of things that I never finished surrounding genealogy.
Okay.
There were some really good stories there. I thought if I could put some flesh and bones on them, they would be good. I'd get maybe 20 pages done, and then it wasn't singing to me. So I put it aside. I did that a couple times.
Okay.
But I had a goal now. I had a goal because my son said he wanted this book, so I said, well, okay, I'll write this book.
Isn't it interesting how our children are oftentimes the impetus for the giant things we take on in our lives? I know my son was the impetus for me to start with my first book, which was also a memoir. How did your other children feel about this? Did the other family members think this was a good idea as well? Were they as supportive?
It was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. Just... my older son, he was a football player in college. I mean, that probably says a lot.
Okay.
Not really into reading or writing, although he's a fantastic poet. He really is a fantastic poet when he wants to be. He was just interested, whatever. But he actually, I think he's read 3 books since he got out of college, and mine was one of them. So, yay me.
That's good that he was... He was interested enough to at least read your work, which is positive.
Yeah, I think so.
So tell me, give me a couple of highlights. We're going to throw your book up here so that people can see it. So this is your book, Summon the Tiger. I love the cover. Where did you get the idea for this?
It wasn't my idea. I had come up with another picture. I had a pair of shoes, and they were Taekwondo shoes, and they were Tiger brand. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool, right? Summon the Tiger. So I put them on a desk with pictures of my kids and the shoes crowd. It was a little busy. And that was my first go at it. And then I had this friend that goes, oh, no, that's not going to work. So they came up with this woman, just going to work kind of woman. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool. I like the color. I really like the color. So I said, well, yeah, I'll go with that.
Okay, super. It looks great. Can you give us just a couple of the highlights? I know for me, unfortunately, my TBR pile is about 15 feet tall. The industry I'm in, I don't get enough read time. I wish I did. At your last featured event that you had at a local bookshop, you mentioned that you spent some time as a merchant marine navigator.
Well, actually, it wasn't merchant marine, but I was a navigator.
Okay, so can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
Because that's very intriguing to me.
It gets a little bit more intriguing being that my father went to Amsterdam and bought the freighter. He bought the freighter, and he brought it over here and outfitted it.
Okay.
So I was navigator on this 110-foot freighter that looked, for all the world, like the King Kong ship.
Wow.
It was 1933 vintage. Little teeny cabins, all wood paneled, a big wood wheel, 5 foot tall. The gear was this 4 foot, 2-inch diameter, come out of the floor, 3-speed. I mean, it stood this tall. You moved it back and forth. I mean, that was, it had forward, neutral, and reverse. That was it.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
and you talk about this in your book.
Because I left college and got on the freighter and we headed out to sea.
And how long did you spend out at sea?
Well, note to self, do not try to sail in the Atlantic in December. It's not a real good idea.
That doesn't sound like a lot of fun.
Well, the storms, I remember. So I'm 5'4", so my eyes are sitting at about 5 foot above the ground.
Okay.
And just at the top of the wheel hits my eyes. And the bridge was 70-some feet from the bow, right? So we're 70 feet from the bow, and I'm standing there on the wheel because I had midnight shift. I had midnight till 2, and then I had 2 to 4 in the afternoon.
Okay.
We were in such rough seas. I looked this way, and there was water eye level. And the ship had a 15-foot from the water line up to the top. So that's 20 feet. 20 feet, I see water here. I look this way.
And you're in the Atlantic.
And we're in the Atlantic.
Okay.
And I see water here, eye level. And the bow is down a huge swell. And I see water straight ahead, and there must have been. I should do the math. I mean, 70 feet, I could draw the triangle, right? They had gotten to have been 40-foot seas. I have never, ever been in anything like that before. We came in at Chesapeake Bay. We didn't go back out again. It was a little too rough. It was really, really stupid rough.
How long were you out in those rough seas?
From New York down to Chesapeake.
About how much time
several
was
days.
that? Several days.
Well, because the wind was blowing and that blows you off course, and you got to correct and it was a big old bronze engine. It's not like we were a little speedboat.
Right. Yeah. It takes a lot of effort to move those ships.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm always fascinated and a little frightened by the freighters that go up and down the Detroit River. We see them at the Blue Water Bridge, and we see them go through the St. Lawrence Seaway, and they're ginormous. I was in a sailboat once, probably, maybe the length of 3 football fields away from a giant freighter, and my captain told me we were safe, and I said, "Are you sure we're safe?" They're ginormous.
They are. In fact, when we first left Detroit, it was storms all the way. And we lost communication. I mean, there was all sorts of press about this. I mean, it was plastered all over the news. Mm-hmm. And so they lost communication with us because it was a horrible gale. And we took shelter because we only drew 14 feet. Well, anyway, we took shelter in a cove at night because no one could go. And we woke up, and all those 600-foot freighters that you're talking about, they couldn't get into the cove because they drew 30 feet.
Right.
But they were just right along the front of the cove. I mean, just stem to stern.
It's a great breakwater.
Huge freighters. And they said that they saw us, that we hadn't sunk or anything. We just didn't have any communication.
Yeah. Wow. What an adventure.
It really was.
That's pretty remarkable. So when you were writing this book, as you were telling me earlier, starts at the very beginning of your life and goes through pretty much
till I retired.
Till you retired and decided to write the book. What did you find was the most challenging part about writing a memoir?
I think the most challenging part was what to put in and what to leave out.
Mm-hmm.
Because you could write, anyone, if they had really, really good memory, you could write a bookshelf full of
Sure.
memoirs. But why would you want to do that? So it was sorting through what might interest people, what might they be able to relate to,
Mm-hmm.
and what it's just fluff. It just, don't even put it in there.
So when you reflect back on the various chapters, what was one chapter that made the cut that you almost thought it wouldn't? What was one that you really debated about, should I keep it in, should I not keep it in? And then how did you finally come to the decision to put it in the book?
It was probably in the beginning and the descriptors. I really, really, really remember my childhood. I photographed it. I mean, I've got an eidetic memory, so it's right there. I mean, I can walk through a house and tell you what was where. I can tell you telephone numbers. I can tell you where we fed the dog.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, no, I'm gonna put that in there. And I kept it in there because at the beginning, you know how you have themes and you want to develop your themes.
Right.
I thought, well, you know what? I need to put that in there so people know when it changes what it's changing from. If I just blow it off, then they won't see this little 1950s
It becomes more of an abrupt transition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wanted to show there was a couple seminal instances that changed our family life, and I needed to describe the normalcy before it, so you had something to compare it to.
Okay, that makes good sense. So you also have another book called The Third Order, which is fiction, which just came out last year.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
I know from writing myself the difference between preparing a fiction manuscript and preparing a memoir manuscript are vastly different. There's a lot more. I think there's almost more research that goes into preparing fiction than nonfiction.
Guaranteed.
So tell us a little bit about the plot behind The Third Order, and then we'll talk about that some more.
Okay. The Third Order, I've always been entranced by Dan Brown's books because I know he did so much research.
Sure.
Right? It's really loaded with a whole bunch of research. You open up the book and it says, this is real, this is real, this is real, this is real. I found that fascinating. So I thought, well, that would be cool. And then I said, well, so I had that little idea, and it was just sitting there, just sitting on the table. And then I thought, well, it's fun to write.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun to write. So but they say, you really should write about stuff that you can be convincing about. And I said, I've been to Italy a couple times. I've been to Scotland. My dad was born there. How in the world could I tie this together? That's kind of how it started. And I did tons of research in the book. I mean, I didn't do any research on that one at all.
It's your life. You don't really need to.
I don't need to. So the storyline is, instead of Agnus Dei, I think that's what Dan Brown used.
Opus Dei.
Opus Dei.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, I can't do that. But, okay, I have Scotland, I've got Italy, and I love Assisi. I mean, I sang in Assisi. I love Assisi.
Okay.
So I thought, St. Francis. Let's see what I can find out about St. Francis. So I found out that St. Francis founded 3 orders, and he was born in 1181, and he had the Franciscan brothers and then the Sisters of St. Clair and then this Third Order. He actually did form a Third Order. And I said, what else was going on at that time when St. Francis was... I found out that he wanted to be a soldier. He actually ended up being a soldier.
St. Francis ended up being a soldier?
He was a soldier before he got the word. He was a kind of like a frat boy. Not that he was a womanizer, but he loved his nice clothes. He gambled and played with his buddies, drank a lot. And his dad was a silk merchant. His dad wanted him to go into business with him. And no, Francesco, he wanted to be a soldier. He became a soldier, and he got captured by the Germans, who were in Italy because the 2 cities were fighting over. They had allegiance to 2 different popes. It's a really, really crazy time in history. I learned so much about it. Well, anyway, so when St. Francis was about 11 years old, there was a guy from Scotland Alan Fitzwater, real guy, who had gone on he was a crusader, Knight Templar. He had gone on the Third Crusade with Richard the Lionheart, and he left to go home. And then I found out that a lot of the crusaders, instead of going all the way around on the ground to get to Jerusalem, they'd go to the foot of Italy and take a boat across the Mediterranean.
Okay.
He said, oh, I can draw a line right through Assisi, right back to Scotland. And there's the story, right? I've got the hook.
Right.
I've got
Absolutely.
The hook.
So what was the most difficult or challenging part for you about writing this story, aside from the research? Because I know that takes a lot of effort and a lot of time to do the research. I'm finding that now with the book that I'm writing. So aside from the complexities that come in with research, what would you say was the most challenging part about writing The Third Order?
The most challenging part was I had to stop, because I would get into it and then I go, well, I want this to happen. I mean, I kind of knew, talk about like 200,000 feet what the story was going to be, but I didn't have any of the details. And I'd get to chapter 4 and go, oh, that needs to happen, but I need to go back and set it up. Where am I going to set it up? Am I going to set it up in chapter 1? I mean, I moved chapters around. I just really reorganized it as I was going, because I would get to a point and say, well, I need to set it up. And if I set it up here, then this doesn't make sense, so I need to move it over.
Right.
Anyway, that was the most challenging part.
So that idea of setting up the timeline, making sure that everything flowed succinctly, was the challenge for you in that book.
Except that I do it, I don't do it on paper. I sort of let it take me where it wants to go. Like I said, I had this really big, I know what I want to happen, right? But how that happens, I didn't know. And so I introduced a character. I said, well, he needs a buddy. I had to introduce another character. I had to figure out how to put him in,
Right.
So I backed up and I put him in and that kind of stuff. But it's pretty much free-flowing. I organize it in my mind. I don't organize it on paper. If I organize it on paper, I end up changing it anyway. It's like I don't like to write longhand because I change so many things. I love computers, right?
Yeah, me too.
Either scratching things out all the time.
Me too. So let's go back to Some in the Tiger for a moment. People who write memoir write them for a lot of different reasons. Some people write memoir just to get their story out, some as a family legacy to leave behind. Some do it to teach something. What was your purpose in writing Some in the Tiger? Why did you want to tell your story?
Well, I was asked to tell my story, but then after I got into it,
yeah, I mean, we know that the impetus was your son coming to you and saying, hey, do this, but what was the driving thing in you that kept you going to take you to, okay, now the book is done?
The takeaway for me, the big aha, was, so I have friends that I'd give them a chapter or two just to test the waters.
Sure.
And I just got the most amazing feedback, like, are you kidding? Really? Kind of like, oh my God. I didn't realize how rather unique my story was at all until I started getting that feedback. And I mean, I got rolled eyes and big open mouths and are you kidding me kind of feedback. So that got me to finish it.
Okay. So it was really the would you say that writing Some in the Tiger was partially self-discovery for you? Did you find some things along this writing journey that maybe you didn't remember or didn't maybe fully become aware of until you sat down to write the book?
I wouldn't say that. I've done an awful lot of introspection in my life. The big aha was how people reacted to it. Because you go through life, well, this is life, right? This is not that unusual. This is life. And when people say, oh, no, this is not a normal life.
Right.
You are way off base. This is not a normal life.
This might be normal for you, but not for the rest of us.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you're going to be doing an author fair coming up on May 18th?
I am, in Grosse Pointe.
Grosse Pointe. And is that just an author festival, or are there going to be other events happening there? And where is it going to be located?
It's at the Ewald branch of the Grosse Pointe public library. It's just 2 hours. It's only authors, local authors.
Okay.
We'll see how it goes.
Do you do a lot of these types of festivals? Do you spend a lot of time in outreach with the public, or do you spend more time in bookshops and doing outreach that way?
I tend not to do bookshops that much. I've done a couple. I tend to do the outreach, and I do a lot on the internet. I try to limit myself to like one event a month in the summer. Well, summer, March to October.
Right.
When it's going on.
Yeah, halfway decent Michigan weather.
Yep.
Yeah. For an aspiring author, what would be your strongest advice?
Write because you love to write. I think the biggest letdown with people who believe they're going to write the next bestseller, well, chances of that happening are pretty close to winning the lottery. Now, there are those who do get a lot of notoriety, but it takes a long time to get your name out there and to build the base. It just takes a really long time. You put a book out there, yeah, you've got maybe 20, 30 reviews. You get people, well, that's 20 or 30. You get your next book out there. You might pick up a few more. But you really have to have a strong portfolio, I think, to really get a big enough audience to really make a difference. And that takes a lot of hard work. So if you really want to be an author, like make a living being an author, you better start early and you better write prolifically. And a lot of people don't have the time, or they start too late or something, and that's fine. I mean, there are a lot of really, really, really good books out there that people write. But at that point, you sell maybe a couple hundred, maybe 1,000. That would be wonderful. But don't think that, don't get disappointed if you don't make the New York Times bestseller list, because the chances of that happening aren't really that good. So you have to know what your work is good. And when people tell you your work is good, that in itself probably would be my best advice. You got to learn to live with that. Everything else, boy, that'll be icing on the cake. You want to make, a bestseller that you want to have someone make it into a movie. Hey, that'd be cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you get disappointed because you're not there, then you probably don't. You've got stories in you, and they won't be written, unless you're writing for the love of writing and you really want to have your followers, even if there are 50 of them, to just say, yeah, that was really good. Yeah.
In my years of doing this, I've noticed that if you want to write and don't worry about the market or how much money you might make.
Yep.
I think one of the biggest pitfalls that authors run into is that field of dreams thing. If you write it, they will buy it.
Yep. Nope.
That's a fallacy. I love Kevin Costner, but I think he messed us up. I just think there's a misconception about that idea. So marketing is really an important part of this. As an independent author, what would you say would be your best marketing suggestion?
I personally, I like to have people review my work, people that I don't know review my work, because I don't want any bias.
Right.
So I will, even pre-publication, I'll send it out to like Reader's Favorite or City Book Review or somebody, and have them review it, because I really think that it's important to me. I want someone who doesn't know me to tell me whether or not it's a good book.
Absolutely.
Right? So I do that, and it kind of like and then I put the quotes on the back, because I think that for me. So I go into a bookstore. First thing, interesting title or interesting cover, pick it up. What's the first thing I do? Read the back.
Right.
And if on the back I see a bunch of 5-star reviews, I'm going, I might be a little bit interested in this.
So on that, let me ask you this. Is a list of reviews on the back cover more appealing to you, or a really well-written synopsis with maybe 2 or 3 reviews? How would you weight the importance of those? Would you weight a synopsis as an important part of the back cover matter?
Absolutely. In fact, I only put 2 or 3 reviews and then a synopsis. I mean, that's my go-to format.
Okay.
Because they want to know what the book's about.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I have. The reason I asked that question is I have seen some authors who only put reviews on the backs of their books. And I know that there are people who are attracted to just reviews because they want to know if this is the latest, greatest, next best, greatest thing, right? And it makes me wonder if maybe those authors are sidelining some of their potential strong readers because they're not really telling people what the book is about.
I totally agree with you. I think, let's see, I have 2 reviews and then a synopsis.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, maybe 2 or 3, depending. I don't think there should be more. But you better tell the people what the book's about.
Right.
I
Yeah,
mean,
don't make them look for it in the first pages.
they won't.
Right. So if you were to offer advice about work-life balance in this instance, most authors have a day job. We are not all as fortunate as you to be retired.
Oh, no, I actually do have a day job. I run my son's back office.
Excellent. So you know about this work-life balance. So we just have like a minute left. What's your best suggestion for creative work-life balance?
Well, what I do is, first of all, I process what I want to write during the day just in the back of my head. It just happens. I would never sit down to a blank screen and say, okay, now I'm going to write. However, that being said, I have decided, because it's so easy to put it aside because life gets in the way, to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I've got 2 things going right now. I'm going to write 1,000 words on this and 500 words on that. That's my goal. Mm-hmm. And I'll sit down when it's dark, when my dogs are asleep, a little glass of wine, a little nice jazz in the background, and I will write at night.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you coming in. This is great to talk to you again, and I wish you all the best success.
Well, thank you. And I really want to give you kudos for supporting the industry here, the local writers industry. You're doing a fantastic job.
Thank you very much. That means a lot. Have a wonderful night.
You too.
Small technical glitches.